Get ready for the Ochelli effect.
I'm a big fan of the show.
Chuck Ochelli, and has been known for many years as a blind JFK researcher specializing in intelligence agency involvement in multiple assassinations, propaganda, and other global criminal operations in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Your listeners are extremely fortunate to have you.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media.
Chuck Ochelli!
It is the 18th day of January 2018, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar, and this indeed is the Ochelli Effect. Broadcast live from the facilities of Ochelli.com, also heard on Awake Radio US, RealLibertyMedia.com via the Ochelli channel, our friends at WindowsOnTheWorld.net, etc., etc., and you know what, even a few micro-broadcasters in the Northeast, if they have not frozen to death by now. So good evening to you, no matter where you are, who you are. Welcome to the show. It is a Thursday or a Thursday night, so therefore we have Carmine Savastano with us, but this is not going to be the average show with Carmine. Why? Well, first of all, Carmine is more of a co-host than a guest, but we do have two guests with us who some of you, if you're longtime listeners, will be familiar with, and we are hitting the topic of JFK assassination myths. This is episode number 13. I cannot believe that I envisioned 10 to begin with. But the material keeps coming, so guess what? So do these shows. And this is an interesting array of individuals because Rob Clark from the Lone Gunman podcast himself is here, and Steve Rowe. Now, Steve is, well, a little bit of a lesser-known guy in some circles, and there's a reason why he's not on the side of those of us who maybe think there's something other than Oswald to be offered when it comes to a solution regarding the Kennedy assassination. However, Steve's work regarding the researching of the assassination is quite interesting, quite solid, and he's a sensible guy. Even though he is on the other side, guess what he can agree with us on? Those of us who are trying to be rational regarding the conspiracy side of it, that there is a great deal of mythology to be offered by many people regarding the JFK assassination. So anyway, this is the way it goes. As per usual, like I said, Carmine's with us, and he's the author of Two Princes and a King, TPAAK.com. Of course, go there. But this is not the discussion for tonight. It is the JFK myths. How you doing, Carmine?
I'm doing good, Chuck. Good to be back on one of the myths episodes.
Well, unfortunate that we still have to do it. But anyway, Rob, the Lone Gunman, for a little while, not so active, but I hear coming back with a vengeance. Am I right or wrong, sir?
What's up, Chuck, and thanks for having me back. It's more of a soft vengeance, like a furry vengeance, you know, but I'm back.
Furry vengeance, I love that.
Yes.
Oh, wow, you're making me cough. I'm sorry. I had many pictures in my head for furry vengeance, brother, and they're all funny. So I love it, though. But the Lone Gunman, do you have an established website? Because you used to have the Lone Gunman website, and you had it on Spreaker, and it's been in a lot of places. Where can people go right now if they want to get the latest Lone Gunman podcast?
I would direct Apple people to iTunes. Other than that, you can find it on just about any other podcasting service out there. The host is at Spreaker.com. The best way to keep in touch with the show is through Facebook right now. Just search for the Lone Gunman podcast on Facebook, and it'll take you to the page. And I basically let the website run dry because I was going to stop doing this, and it didn't make sense to re-up it for another 2 years. So yeah, there is no website right now, so just follow me on Twitter or Facebook.
Cool. I'll tell you what, too. I didn't tell you this before airtime because we had a little bit of a technical issue, but I want to talk to you actually about putting the new Lone Gunman podcasts in a couple other places for people to listen to live stream after the show, if you don't mind. So hopefully we'll be announcing something about that very soon because I'd like people to be able to get more and more access to what it is you do, brother. Anyway, moving on, Steve Rowe, I was gentle about my introduction. You know, most guys in my position would go, well, we've got one of these lone nut guys with us. We've got one of these people who thinks Oswald is guilty with us. You know, and then they would begin disparaging and all this other nonsense. And but, you know, listen, you and I have a disagreement about the ultimate conclusion here, but I'm open-minded, my friend, and I got to tell you, the material that we're going to cover tonight is a whole lot more ludicrous than Oswald acting alone, in my estimation, and most of the material that we've covered on the lone, on these episodes where we've had Rob before, we've had various other people join us, including Sherry Feaster, including Alan Dale, including Larry Hancock. I mean, some of the people that know this case inside and out, along with yourself. We have covered a lot of things that are, even if you believe that it's ridiculous to think Oswald did it, these things are even more ridiculous than that could possibly be. I would rather come down on your side than go along with nonsense and made up fairy tales, Steve. But how is it that you would introduce people to you if they haven't heard you on the show before?
Hi, Chuck. Good to be with you guys. Rob, Carmine. Yeah, it's been a while. No, I'm a kind of a lone wolf type guy. I just kind of run my own little deal, you know, but so I'm not well known. But, you know, I like you actually described, you know, I believe in the lone nut. So, but there's a lot of stuff out there I keep researching to get better understanding on, you know, and you're exactly right. These myths are ludicrous and need to be put down as fast as they can because they're duping people left and right out there. So guys are doing a great service, and I encourage it, and I love those shows. Actually, I've listened to a few of your shows, and I always listen to Rob when he gets on, too.
Well, there you go. And, you know, for the listeners' edification, Steve is very knowledgeable on some of the really deep topics having to do with the very local individuals. I mean, stuff that Steve sometimes discusses, I get a little lost on, and I've been at it a long time, right? And, I mean, I go, wait a minute, I got to put this together in my head. And usually he even knows about some of the characters that are not, you know, the focuses of people's books. He knows about plenty of the characters that are the focuses of some people's books, documentaries, yada, yada, yada. But fact is that Steve has gone rather deep and into the fine grains of a lot of diverse topics related to the assassination, characters related to real-life people that are related to the assassination in an interesting way. And although I am hearing that you're contributing to some people's work, including possibly Stu Wexler, and also you contributed partially to Gail Nix Jackson's work. I'm looking forward to the day when maybe I can get some books that are written directly by you. That, I think, would be an adventure, my friend. And again, I don't have to agree with your conclusions to know that a great deal of your knowledge base is very, very solid, and happy to have you along, my friend. Thank you. So, yeah, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah, it was, I've been helping Stu a little bit on a few things, and then, of course, Gail's book, I know you had her on here recently, so got a little chapter in there. So, anyway, I encourage everybody to read it if you get a chance. You know, if you don't, that's fine either. I'm not worried if nobody reads it or not, so... Anyway, go ahead.
Well, but either way, it's just I want to give people an idea because, you know, one of the criticisms that has come at me from some of the old myth shows recently has been, why do you have a guy on who doesn't because information is information. And Steve brings a lot to the table. One of the coolest things, matter of fact, was a picture that I wound up sharing around a little bit, and it's going to have to do with one of the topics tonight. But anyway, no spoilers. I have actually given a document and it's an image of a document, let's be fair. Carmine has had no chance to verify this thing or anything else. I am satisfied the document is legitimate. I would like Carmine to read from it, and really I want everybody who is on this call to listen carefully to what is in this document. It is a piece of communication from the Assassination Records Review Board. Okay? And I have a purpose behind this. I'm not going to tell you what it is until after we go over the document. So, Carmine, you ready to do that?
Yeah, I can read from it. So you don't want me to tell them anything about the origin?
Listen, the origin is on the document. We'll discuss where I obtained the image from, and we'll go into it a little bit. Now, this is from, in my estimation, just for everybody's edification, from a legitimate source. I'm not showing you a fake document. I'm not telling you that something is out of line here. This thing is, well, I'm not going to get into my impressions of it because I want everybody on this call to give me a 1-sentence or 2-sentence impression of what it is we're going to hear. And this way we will get a snapshot of the really Rorschach test that occurs when people start to examine these documents. And this is from 3 individuals which are extremely different in their posture. Rob is Rob. I don't know how to categorize him. But Steve is on the low nut side of things, right? Carmine is very much married to the official records, okay? The official records all the time. I mean, he always goes back to that stuff. What does the investigation say? What does the document actually say? What is the evidentiary proof in a legal sense? Very strict about these things. I'm a little more out there and a little more speculative than some of these guys are. Absolutely. But I want everybody to sort of give a snapshot impression of a document that you could encounter when beginning to, dredge through these things. And there's a purpose behind it, but more on that later. Go ahead, Carmine.
Okay, it's a summary of a phone call. A person named Joan Zimmerman was calling another person named James Mastrovito, who had a discussion with another person, the third person Chuck was referring to, named Dave Montague. It says, James Mastrovito called Dave Montague in response to information that Dave had sent at the beginning of March 1997. I wanted to speak with James Mastrovito because he was in charge of the JFK assassination file at the Secret Service in 1975. Mastrovito said he started working at the Secret Service in 1959 and retired in 1979. From 1960 to 1962, Mastrovito was on the White House detail. In the summer of 1962, Mastrovito was in the United States Secret Service field office in Charleston, West Virginia. After the assassination, he was called to headquarters. He became a deputy in the Intelligence Division, formerly PRS, for 10 years before becoming the director of the Intelligence Division a few years before he retired. He worked with Walter Young, who replaced Robert Boak. According to Mastrovito, Boak moved out of the PRS in the reorganization of the Intelligence Division after 1963. When Mastrovito took charge of the JFK assassination file, it consisted of 5 or 6 file cabinets of material. After Mastrovito finished, quote, culling irrelevant material, the collection was down to 1 5-drawer file cabinet. Mastrovito guessed that his purging of extraneous material took place around 1970. He said that the extraneous material consisted of 2,000 to 3,000 mental cases who called the Secret Service after Kennedy's assassination to claim responsibility for the shooting. Mastrovito offered that Robert Blakey questioned him about the destruction of documents and then threatened legal action. Mastrovito pointed out that Chief Rowley, that would be James Rowley for those familiar with the case, August 1965 memo directed him to remove irrelevant material. Blakey had obtained index cards from the Secret Service for what were called the, quote, White House cases and or CO2 cases. These cards had been sent to the Warren Commission in a card index file. From these cards, Warren Commission members had requested specific Secret Service reports. Blakey had also sought specific files based on the examination of these index cards. Apparently, Mastrovito had destroyed some of the files Blakey had wanted to see. Mastrovito decided which files to keep and which files to destroy. Mastrovito said no one had access to the assassination file except people in the Secret Service. Some reports were copied for the FBI and the Warren Commission. Mastrovito said protective surveys were not in the assassination file, but were kept in the operations division. Mastrovito said that the CO2 number referred to Intelligence Division or PRS numbering. He speculated that a COS would go to the chief's office. CO2 cases did not go to the chief's office unless there was a particular or special reason for the chief's attention. Mastrovito mentioned that Thomas Kelly was an assistant director of the Secret Service when Mastrovito knew him. Kelly interviewed Oswald in the DPD jail. Mastrovito used to kid Kelly because he never wrote a final report on that case. I asked Mastrovito if he had viewed or obtained any artifacts he was in charge of for the assassination file. Mastrovito replied that he had received a piece of President Kennedy's brain. Mastrovito offered that this item was contained in a vial with a label on it identifying its contents. The vial was the size of a prescription bottle. Mastrovito did not remember if it was glass or plastic. The vial was from the Air Force Institute of Pathology. Mastrovito said this was from the Air Force Institute of Pathology, and said the vial was from the AFIP lab, came into his possession about 3 or 4 years later after the assassination.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to give my impressions first. I'm not going to even comment. I want to turn to Steve Rowe, who is, again, a guy who is well familiar with many official records, is well familiar with, the snooze fest of this discussion of how records are being kept and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm sure you've read this kind of thing 1,000 times, Steve. But the content of this, which I believe is dated April 1st, 1997, which is when the document was memorialized, I believe. Well, it's an interesting communication, Steve. I'd like to hear in a couple of sentences, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is indeed interesting. It's not surprising that the Secret Service has purged a lot of those things. The piece about the brain is pretty interesting in itself. So, I know the Secret Service was in COIA mode back then, and my initial impression is it doesn't surprise me that happened, and but the part about the brain is pretty interesting, where they got it from the Air Force and pathology there. So somewhere along the line they got the Air Force got it from the Navy or something up there in Bethesda. I'm not sure, but that is interesting.
So, with that, I'll turn to the next most, what I believe would be conservative interpreter here of said document. Carmine, I know you would like to verify and make sure that this document is entirely legitimate, but let's just assume for the sake of the discussion that it absolutely is without question. And that's something that should not be done by individuals who want to use something as a piece of evidence. You need to make sure that it is as legitimate and reliable as possible, because there's plenty of fudged, forged, and manufactured things out there. But, Carmine, you just read this thing. What is your quick impression of what you just went over? Because Steve broke it into two pieces, which I like. And so did I in my mind, but go ahead. What's your impression?
Well, I'm not surprised that they destroyed records. They did that before. We know they destroyed other records as far as the Secret Service goes. So, like with Steve, I think that it's unsurprising that they did this. I haven't heard of the specific instance before, which is interesting. I don't doubt that they had thousands of people calling them, trying to claim responsibility. People are wont to do that. And as we all know, there are people who try to remake huge portions of history.
Right.
So, yeah, no, I think that, all that seems, and I'd say, I agree again. I think Steve is right. The most interesting point is the brain. My question would be to that is, how many pieces are out there, and who's passing them around? Is this all the same piece? And if this is a piece of it, how could it have been whole when they did the recheck?
Well, there's some other interesting questions there, right? Okay, so I'll leave your impressions right there. I'm sure we could go into a whole discussion about this document, which, by the way, if you want to see this thing for yourself, what is the name of that website over there, Carmine? I always screw up these letters. The ARRC,
Assassinations Archives damn it, now I'm looking at the AARB thing. Yeah, Assassination Archives Research Center, AARC.
AARC, right. I was hoping you wouldn't screw it up because I knew I would. All right. Well, anyway, the AARC, if you go there and you take a look at the article, which is entitled, and it's a group article, about things that are missing. Okay, pieces of evidence that are missing from the case, documents that are missing, etc. Bill Kelly, Malcolm Blunt, John Newman are all together on this article, and this is one of the images that is presented there as part of the discussion. I leave it there. Read it yourselves. I'll provide a link in the podcast. But, and this was brought to my attention for the listeners' edification again by Alan Dale. So, now, Rob Clark. You've had time to now soak this in, and you've heard us talk a little bit. I'm sure we didn't influence your impressions. Fire away, brother.
Well, when it comes to Secret Service documents, I haven't seen a whole lot, pertaining to the assassination, and I've heard the stories of them destroying a lot of stuff, and I understand that completely and totally. Like Steve said, it's more of a CYA move than anything because of their, what happened that day under his protection. Yeah, the brain, of course, we've all heard the story about it being missing, it being, in Bethesda, hardly non-existent, like blown out of his head. But then we have a whole brain when we get to Bethesda when they're doing that autopsy, and then it comes up missing later, and now we have pieces going around. And as far as the document's legitimacy, everybody's heard of the McCone rally document. It's a very highly debated document out there, pertaining to the Secret Service. It's just I haven't seen the document, so it's hard to say whether this thing is legit or not. It's interesting, and I would say, I agree with Carmine too. I agree that a lot of those files there were probably nutcases, either after the assassination claiming credit or before the assassination threatening the president's life. And the fact that we don't have a lot of these left anymore is kind of disturbing a little bit, but I can understand why they did it.
Right. Okay. Now, you notice I want the listener to understand that between these three gentlemen, we've come up with a fairly concise and reasonable approximation here, all of them coming down on the side of believing that, well, first of all, the Secret Service destroying, what could we call it? Extraneous documentation that is really not of great significance would be understandable and probably part of what just went on. And that documentation had been destroyed, these kinds of things. So that is the first part of this discussion. The second part with the brain gets a little stranger because, point of fact, in the photographic record, which has not been shown to the public, but based on the accounts of individuals who have been granted permission to see it, there is supposed to be an image of a nearly intact brain. This is in contradiction, direct contradiction, to the testimony of many people who said that there was virtually no brain left in the skull, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, these things are a matter of public record, and you can look into them. Another point of fact that needs to be recognized right now is that at one time, the National Archives had what was listed on the inventory as the brain of John F. Kennedy, effectively in its possession. And that has been lost. And by lost, I do mean to say that there is no official accounting for exactly where it went. However, the idea that there are souvenir pieces of brain that have gone around has been introduced before. Even an individual attempted to sell a portion of a brain at one point at auction a few years back. I believe it was in the 1990s, and turns out that when somebody actually tested this whatever it wasn't even human brain tissue, so it was a hoax. Okay. I'm choking back my reaction. I don't know where to file this document in my mind, to be honest with you, because on the one hand, it's very typical, very, put me to sleep with the procedures, possibilities, why it is the Secret Service, who is accused often of having destroyed many a record, and apparently they did. Even motorcade records are alleged to have been destroyed previous to the Assassination Records Review Board. Good news there is that some of that has been reconstructed from the shift reports and things like that from our friend who wrote that book, The Kennedy Detail, who turned around and handed them over to the National Archives. I have yet to have seen them preserved there, but I understand that they have been turned over there because researcher Bill Kelly pointed out that this was a way to reconstruct it. Okay. All of that put aside, I don't know what to make of this. Is it just a fictitious account? And at the end of the day, what do we actually have? The memorialization of an individual's account who did have a official responsibility. Now, this is not related to his official responsibility, but just as a side note, I happen to have a piece of the brain at one point in time. Is this a believable story? Is this legitimate? In my estimation, what you need is more evidence to back this up. But this is a document that is part of the communication record for the Assassination Records Review Board. So this is the thing that we're faced with when sometimes examining pieces of evidence. We're going to delve into things tonight, and I'm going to shut up after this, I promise, that have to do with that which we can easily agree upon. Notice, we understand that there are certain realities connected to the way the Secret Service handled their records, that records had been destroyed, that a natural purging of extraneous information would certainly have been normal, that an individual might have been charged with it. We understand all of these things as natural parameters. And then you have some of the strangeness which is contained within this case on occasion, and no matter where you stand or what conclusion you come to, you have to pause every now and then and examine some of the ghoulish, odd, and even bizarre things that have occurred when it comes to the official record, but also the alleged independent investigations and true independent investigations even. All of it is to be questioned and tested and retested over and over and over again. So that was the point of that, and I hope everybody is, I know I took a little bit of time with it, but I think that this was a good way to show us that all of us can come together and understand what it is we're dealing with here, even though we are standing and looking at this from slightly different angles of conclusion. We can easily agree that there is an acceptable standard of logic and evidence for a lot of the things we're about to cover. So with that, I turn it back over to Carmine, and we're going to get everybody more involved in this discussion, and I promise I'm going to be much more quiet. So go ahead, Carmine.
Okay, and I'll say I just want to make one last comment on that document.
Sure.
I would want to see other call logs to compare it to. That would be one of the things I would want before I would, sign off on saying it's great. Just because I haven't seen, I think that's definitely something we should always do, is you want to get verified versions of documents to compare to whatever you're trying to see the legitimacy of.
Oh, yeah, but the potential exists that there might not be more than one. There could be just the one, which was then kept. Sometimes a staffer makes a call, and what we have is their memo. And if we dig a little deeper, we might be able to get their notes, or maybe there's a recording. There's a lot of possibilities and a lot of ways to verify and vet these things. But, of course, we should do that at all times. But what I'm saying is, even if you get past that point and you accept this as entirely legitimate, the individual is legitimate, the job title that they claim to have held is legitimate, all of these things being checked off, you're still left with some pretty interesting things to deal with when it comes to evidence. So I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead.
Okay. So for tonight's show, when considering the possible suspects related to a possible assassination conspiracy targeting President John F. Kennedy, some names are mentioned with reasonable evidence and ideas to support that they might have been involved. However, there are other claims as well. with less than substantial evidence and largely shrouded in speculation. Suspects emerge not from the direct or even the peripheral connections to the matter, but due to later discovered criminality or dishonest practices. However, just because a person is dishonest or has committed a lesser crime based upon media review does not mean they are capable or likely to have masterminded a former plot. Oftentimes, a political villain or rebuked world leader has been declared guilty by some who merely wish to blame a live, unpopular modern target instead of offering a more likely, less-known possibility. Such, I would contend, is the case of those who prior have declared that former Presidents Lyndon Johnson and George H.W. Bush are definite suspects related to the Kennedy assassination. First, I would like to note is that Johnson and Bush claims are largely mutually exclusive. If Johnson is the mastermind, then Bush is not, and vice versa.
Hold 1 second, because one more former president is often mentioned in this melee of accusing the demonized and otherwise publicly criminalized individuals, and that would be Nixon. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Yet there are neither of the propositions presented substantial evidence, but rather subsist on implications and illusions. Some believe that because LBJ was dishonest, crass, and financially manipulated economic practices, he is capable of orchestrating a complex, successful assassination conspiracy. Yet, do the facts support these claims? So I had a few major points I just wanted to quickly go over, and then I'm going to turn over to Rob, because Rob has something new to throw in on LBJ. And then I have a couple new ones after that, and then Steve has stuff for Bush, and, we'll all, of course, contribute whenever you feel like, entering the conversation. So just some of the points that we've discussed prior, and I think that are worthwhile with LBJ to consider were, we know that there was the memo from Johnson to Hoover to ask if the shots privately were meant for him. And LBJ was reportedly found crying on Air Force One in the bathroom by General Godfrey McHugh. LBJ had the FBI and CIA investigating claims about loose ends tied to the Kennedy assassination. If he were responsible, why reopen portions of the case for additional inspection? LBJ confessed to a White House aide that in a moment of weakness he believed there was a conspiracy. Once again, if he's responsible, why would you tell anyone that something could be going on and there's a conspiracy and you'd want to reopen the case?
Also, a public proclamation. I don't know if you included that in your notes, did you?
The one that he made, I don't know if it was it Cronkite he was talking to?
Yeah, it was an interview with Walter Cronkite, right.
Okay. Yeah, where he privately said that he thought more people were involved. So once again, it doesn't serve his interest if he is responsible to be telling people that there should be an investigation.
Well, yeah, because quite honestly, if the if the public is satisfied with Oswald as the lone gunman, and the lone person who came up with said plot, why would you even begin to introduce the idea of anything other than that? If you're the guilty party, you've already got a fall guy. If that is the situation, again, I am not somebody who believes in the Johnson did it theory or Johnson mastermind theory, but anyway, please continue, Carmine.
It was not LBJ that ordered the body transported to Washington, but Robert Kennedy at the suggestion of John McCone, and RFK was the person who suggested Johnson should be sworn in on Air Force One to prevent the country from having no leader for hours and thus paralyzing the U.S. government and creating public unrest. So those two often attributed things to Johnson aren't true either, and we've covered those with documents before in the show. Lyndon Johnson did not want the Warren Commission to investigate originally. He first chose J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI to conduct an investigation they largely concluded in 72 hours. So when people try to say that the Warren Commission was at the behest of Johnson, it was created by him, but it wasn't what he intended. He intended to have Hoover wrap this up quietly and, do whatever he could to try to prevent a war.
It was at the suggestion of Bill Moyers, his aide too. They were going back and forth on that with Katzenbach and Moyers, and then he brought it to Johnson, and then Johnson signed off on it.
Well, there you go. And as to the swearing-in thing, there's a lot of wrangling that went on there, which I guarantee nobody had the wherewithal to, again, memorialize. I'm sure there was more than one discussion. Is there a possibility that Johnson wanted this done and somehow it was suggested to Bobby or whatever? It's irrelevant.
Well, it's in McCone's diary, so McCone suggested it to Bobby.
Well, right, but simply because it's in McCone's diary that he did does not mean that he's aware fully of every single communication.
Oh, no. I just think that
Yeah.
because some people were like, well, what if McCone lied? Well, what reason does McCone have to lie in his personal diary?
Yeah, none.
He didn't think we were ever going to see it, so.
None. But I leave it as a partially open question, because whether Johnson decided that it would be a good thing to have himself sworn in or not, this could have been merely for, well, PR purposes, really, to make sure that it was well established. I mean, let's look at this as in a benign way as possible. Let's say that he just wanted to make sure that the American public had an image of a president who is now standing up and taking the oath of office, despite the shock which had occurred only a short time ago. Nationally, it might have been thought of as a way to put a good face on for the nation, if you will. That's a benign way to look at it. There's a lot of sinister ways to look at it. It could have been ego-driven. He wanted to make sure that it was absolutely established in the public's mind that he now had the office. These things are all equally possible and still not proof of any sort of conspiratorial activity on Johnson's part. So please continue.
Well, that's everything I had as far as just the major general points, and I was going to turn it over to Rob.
Excellent. So Rob Clark, LBJ, the mastermind, as they like to tell us. Go ahead.
Hey, just real quick to add to that, what Carmine just said about being nationally viewed as a I guess a look of faith and strength. I would actually go a step further and put that, maybe globally, the rest of the world, we had enemies, say Russia, for instance. They see our head of state, our president get killed. Hey, it's a perfect time to strike because nobody knows what the hell's going on. There's no president. It could have been a show for not just the nation but the world to say, hey, here, we have our president. This is our guy. There is no stuttering here, and I just wanted to add that little piece there before we hop into
right.
what I wanted to talk about today. Yeah.
What you mean, Rob? I'm sorry, hang on. But what you mean, Rob, is like, for instance, there was a lot of tension over East and West Germany at the time. Of course, the people that were really at the switch on both sides of that were the U.S. and the USSR on each side of the Berlin Wall, is what it would become, right? And there was a lot of tension in that area. Now, if somebody got it in their mind that the U.S. was in disarray because there was nobody at the helm, it might have been thought to a good idea to establish right away on the face of the global media, if you will, that somebody is absolutely in charge and nothing has changed. The transfer of power has occurred, and you are not dealing with a rudderless ship or a headless leadership in the U.S. I mean, this would be a natural thing for strategic concerns as well as diplomatic.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So with that, you're absolutely tracking perfectly well as far as I can tell. But let's see what else we got on the LBJ Mastermind today.
All right. Now, something we haven't covered here on the Myth Show when it has to do with LBJ is a relatively minor figure that a lot of people haven't really heard of, who's been gaining a little traction lately in the quote-unquote community, and that is a guy by the name of Roderick McKenzie.
Now, Steve is laughing because I want you guys to know, again, see, here's the details that Steve always, I find some new detail and I go, here's a minor figure. Steve usually knows who these guys are right away. And a lot of you out there probably going, who's McKenzie? Unless you're deep in the community again, you probably don't know who Roderick is. So please, by all means, who are we talking about here, Rob?
Well, Roderick McKenzie is a very interesting character. I put him on the level of myth makers such as Chauncey Holt, Beverly Oliver, Judith Baker. I mean, he's right up there with them. He's got a grand tale that he weaves, inserting himself in the assassination, knowing Mac Wallace, knowing Chauncey Holt, and I'm going to go through it here and give you a little bit of the timeline on things, but this guy is still alive, and we can sit here and snicker all we want and think it's ridiculous and funny, but I tell you what, I was sent a message with a link in it to a YouTube video, and I figured, okay, well, I'll click through and see what this is about. So I clicked through, and there's a JFK researcher, in quotes, presenting a 2-hour lecture at a local library in the state of Washington named Brian Snoddy, Snoddy. I've never heard of him before in the community, but I mean, maybe you guys have. I don't know. I've never heard of this guy before I saw this video. And also,
all I ever get anymore are what is it, JFK to 9/11 or Rich Man's whatever the hell, that thing I keep getting over and over again.
Yeah.
So I don't get this one. I never saw this guy up until very, very recently, and I have no idea of his background or anything. But go ahead.
Yeah, I don't either. But the disturbing thing is that this video has been out for 2 months, and it has 28,000 some views. This is why stuff like this is a problem. And I mean, I don't know, Chuck, what your numbers are on YouTube, but I tell you what, I'm lucky, and I know you can hear my show. Most people don't listen to me on YouTube, but just as a for instance, my show, I'm lucky to get between 100 and 400 listens on YouTube, and that's when they've been around for months and months and months. And for this to have over 28,000 views in 2 months blew my mind. Because when I start telling you guys about this guy, Roderick McKenzie, and what he's alleging, it's ridiculous. I mean, there's just no other word for it.
Well,
and this guy's still alive.
Well, first of all, I get about the same kind of numbers on YouTube that you do, but it's not my primary outlet either. Next is please thrill us with the details of this fascinating story that already has me curious, because first thing I want to know right away is he a tramp also? Because, usually these guys have to be a tramp or somebody that they say is in a photograph somewhere, and it's often, since Chauncey Holt is supposed to be a tramp, according to his daughter, and according to Wim Dankbar, and according to, anybody who doesn't really understand how people look in photographs many, many years later. I'm wondering, is this guy a tramp, or is he a key figure? Please fill in the details.
Okay. Well, what he's alleging, of course, is that he ran a safe house in Dallas at the time of the assassination. He was part of a traveling circus that was co-opted by the mafia and CIA. Okay.
Wait. Rob, did you say a circus that was co-opted by the mafia and the CIA?
Yes. He claims he was part of Dale Graham, who's a relatively famous Hollywood circus guy, right? Dale Graham ran this traveling circus, but he was co-opted by the mafia. He said he also worked with guys like Johnny Rosselli. He was employed by Sam Giancana out of Chicago to run this safe house in Dallas. Okay? This is what he's saying.
Let me enter one thing, because I know a little bit about mafia history, and you do mean Italian mafia, by the way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking, because sometimes people use that word and they don't necessarily mean Italians. Just for clarification. Best I know is that the only time that, say, Italians have ever been involved with the circus like that is usually when they show up and threaten to have a union come down and give them problems about, assembling the rides or putting up a tent or something like that, and it's usually a couple of bucks, and the guy goes away and nothing bad happens to your circus. That's about the only time I've heard about that kind of thing. I've never heard about, the mob co-opting a circus. I'm not sure for what purpose. But please, by all means, continue.
Okay. Well, apparently he was saying that Rosselli was kind of like the Hollywood and the mob's go-between guy. When it comes to, and they were making these circus movies in Hollywood at the time with Dale Graham and something to this effect. But I was thinking earlier, where did this Mac Wallace myth originate from? So I started looking, I started searching, and the first time that I could see him mentioned was in 1984 when Billy Soestes mentioned, in his court trial or whatever, that Mac Wallace was LBJ's personal hitman, right?
Right.
So who else do we hear this from? We hear it again in the 90s in a book called The Men on the Sixth Floor. And it was written by, two guys. I forget their names right off the top of my head. I think Philip Rogers and the other guy's escaping me right now. But these are the guys that did the presentation at the infamous Ask conference there in Dallas at the early 90s when they introduced Lois Gibson's identification of Chauncey Holt, Charles Harrelson, Charles Rogers as the Tramps, okay? Now, apparently, Robert McKenzie has made an amalgamation of all this horse crap, okay? And he's rolled it into this story that's just amazing to me. Like, to mirror something that he calls him Percy Holt, but it's Chauncey Holt by his alias or whatever he was going by there. Chauncey Holt made certain claims, and one of them was that he was trained at Fort Detrick for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Flaps and Seals School in the art of making fake IDs and identification, which he claims that he did to use to make fake Secret Service documents that he handed out to everybody and their brother up there on the grassy knoll before the assassination.
Right.
That's Chauncey Holt's story,
Well, because he was also a counterfeiter, had worked with Hollywood cowboys, from the old Western movies, a bunch of these guys. He was all kinds of, and I'm convinced that part of Holt's story is actually partially true, but not when it comes to when we start rolling it all together. He probably knew some people. I really do think that. But this guy, it sounds to me like he made a bad photocopy of Chauncey Holt's story, and instead of cowboys, we got clowns, baby. Something's wrong here. Is he a tramp though, or he just knew the tramps? Okay, did he date Judy Baker at some point?
No, but I think he alleges that the tramp stayed at his safe house.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I was just checking because I might as well test all of the ludicrous water that could be there. And okay, please go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Now, during the assassination, Rod McKenzie claims that he was on the phone to Johnny Rosselli when Johnny Rosselli was allegedly eating at the Baylor Hospital cafeteria in Dallas, and that one of the people that Rosselli talked with during the hit, okay? And then he says, Jake Miranda, which is one of his intelligence connections, and I were at Baylor cafeteria too, so all three of us were not shooters by our own alibis. And then he's claiming that Permindex was paying everybody. Permindex was paying everybody with these vouchers in Dallas and New Orleans, okay? And they got it from Chicago. Apparently, Permindex from Canada was paying everybody for their involvement in the JFK assassination. And with that, in his self-published book, he provides a copy of a Permindex voucher for. I don't remember what it was right offhand. I think it was for something like $14. And you could barely read it. I mean, it looked like a chicken took a pen in his talons and like scribbled something on the paper. So I mean, you couldn't really tell. I mean, it looked like a 4-year-old wrote it. So who knows?
This reminds me of the guys who were supposed to be rodeo riders who claim, I guess they were garbage men, and then they were rodeo riders, and they wrote a book a couple of years ago, and they were supposed to be somehow mob-linked. Wow. Why is my head starting to hurt?
Just wait. It gets better.
Oh, it gets better. I'm sorry. Please continue.
I wanted to, real quick, Rob, I just wanted to interject. I looked up the book on Amazon, and this is the book, according to the website at least, that inspired the men who killed Kennedy.
Right.
Oh wow. Oh, yeah. Rob, please continue.
Okay. Now, at this bunch at the Holland Avenue safe house, okay, he says we're sent there by Jack Ruby. The other mob people and Jake Miranda, who was in daily contact with me, I got my orders from this guy. And he says Tippett, the cop, was in the know and brought money and people to me. I don't think Tippett was a bad cop, though. And he also says that the phony preacher, Jack Bowen, also sent a lot of resters there for short times. So now we've got Jack Ruby, Tippett, and Jack Bowen.
Is Roscoe White in there somewhere?
Not yet.
Okay, give him time. Go ahead.
You give him time. Give him time.
He will be there. So he says the mob, the Defense Intelligence Security Council, the FBI Section V or 5, through Reverend Bowen, Chauncey Holt were my contacts, plus Tippett a few times. Otherwise, I can't say who ran the safe house. So he's got all these people supposedly running this safe house and getting paid with Permadex vouchers. And a lot of these guys, he says, not only work for the CIA and the FBI and the ONI, but for Lockheed Martin. So he's bringing in, everybody and their brother into it.
It seems a bit high. It seems a bit high of a number to try to get away with something.
Yeah, here's the issue, too, is that I can tell you that I already sense where the roots of this have come from. And I bet you Steve is I've never asked Steve this question, but Steve, you ever heard of something called the Torbett document?
Yes, I have.
Okay. You see how he's laughing, right? Okay, let's go with this just for a second. Does this not sound, I'm already hearing FBI Special Division 5. Maybe very soon, Rob, NASA will come into this, and a few other things, maybe some Nazis, along with all of what you've just described. I think the roots of this actually sound very familiar with the Torbett document, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
And Permindex to boot, right? So
there's a guy that's there's a guy that's championing McKenzie too, and I'll leave his name out. I'm sure Rob knows. But
Richard Hook? Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And it's guys. Look, here's how you boil this stuff down and cut through the crap. Anybody wants to confess to killing the president or being a part, why don't we just go over there and make a citizen's arrest and get rid of them right now? It's as stupid as it could be. But it's entertaining.
Exactly.
Well, that's
entertaining too, but it's really stupid. Why would you confess to murdering somebody?
And honestly, then go make a court statement. That's what I always like to say to these people, as JVB being one of them. Go make a court statement then. If you've done all these illegal things and people have died as a result of them, then go tell the police.
Yeah, it's simple as that. Let me take you down there. Let's go to the FBI right now. We can,
and
we can do it.
Yeah, and I would guarantee you 99% of the time they're going to say no because they realize they'll be committing perjury by making false statements. And then they will go to jail.
And let's not leave James Files out of that request as well. Please, by all means, go ahead and swear under oath to a grand jury that you did this because love to have it solved right now, Jimmy. Mr. Sutton, whatever it is your name legally is, please. Anyway, are there any more highlights to this crap fest of
yes.
Oh, my goodness. Please continue, Rob. You bring the most bizarre things. I want you to know that. To the Myth shows. I love you for it. We had L. Ron Hubbard, actually, I think, during one of these discussions because of you. Yeah. And I love you, man, really. Thank you for the migraine. Excedrin is something you should buy stock in because I'm going to need some. Please continue.
Yeah. Well, pop a few more, Chuck, because it just gets better.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, you are correct. Permindex was our master, he says. That bunch ran the folks that I work with. The CIA and the ONI were into it too. But I feel we were all puppets of the DOD. The other agencies were rogue-type elements. But the people that I knew, Guy Bannister, Frank Sturgis, Mac Wallace, Joe Dugan, Johnny Rosselli, and of course he was mob, and most of the other had loyalties if one can be in this business. Sam Giancana, Charles Rogers, Chauncey Holt, David Ferry, Mitch Werble, and so on were getting Permindex bucks. And it came to New Orleans and Texas from Canada.
Okay, Rob, can I ask one question?
Yes.
Does he ever mention Clay Shaw?
Yeah.
Because that's the whole reason. Like, one of the things that's always killed me about the Permindex claims that people are always making is it was a trade organization.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
that's all it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't like an assassination group. It wasn't some evil government conspiracy organization. Shaw did a deal with them, and then suddenly, because he got accused later, they think it's what you're saying from this guy. I don't understand how that happens, how the transformation occurs.
Well, there's a lot of things about this I don't understand, Carmine. So, I'm glad that that's your only problem here. I'm lost in this mix. The only thing that keeps ringing in my head is the circus, because just
funny.
Wow.
Please. He must have seen Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Okay. Rob, is there more?
Oh yes. Oh, of course.
Okay.
So he alleges that through his knowledge that Jim Garrison was on the right track. He just didn't have the right kind of evidence to get Clay Shaw and nail him to the wall. He says Bannister used to order IDs and white FBI cars with different names on them. I asked no questions. David Ferry would pick them up at the Sailors Bar and hotel I stayed at on Canal Street. I often wondered what a big shot FBI guy and supposedly an ONI guy like Bannister was using me to make fake FBI IDs for when he was formerly and maybe still with those units. He goes on to say, let's see. Sorry, I'm scrolling.
Listen, I don't blame you for needing notes to keep this straight, because there's no way that I could. I really can't. I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
When did this guy first start? Do you know, Chuck? Do you or Steve know, like, when he first started to bring out this stuff? Because if he inspired them in Kilkenny, you got to think it's pre-1990.
I never heard of him before 1990. He had a self-published sting, and his first interview I saw online was like from 2013 until Richard Hook redid it and put it back on Amazon. And then Snowdy started doing these videos. I don't know. I'd never heard of him before 2013, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, I've still not really heard of him. I just saw his name recently, and quite honestly, you'd have to go back to 1988 for when Turner was assembling this, if I remember correctly, because it was for the 25th anniversary that was initially conceived. So possibly even previous, even 87 might have been when it was. Now 87 precedes my time in the case for certain. Even on a cursory level, I wasn't really involved at that point. It was just kind of interesting to me. So I don't know. I have no idea where to put this guy if we're going to try and give him any legitimacy whatsoever, which I'm not doing. By the way, I want to make that very clear right now.
But he had a PDF file that you could download for free on some website. I don't even remember what it was. It was like a 90-page PDF book that he self-illustrated, and he's not a very good artist, let me tell you. So that's quite a treasure if you can find it out there still. I'm sure Richard Hook cleaned it up quite a bit for his reissue. But I wanted to jump ahead here a little bit to one of the highlights of his story, and that's Mac Wallace.
Yeah, please.
Of course,
because we started this section on LBJ, and I have yet to hear LBJ mentioned. But please, by all means, you gotta. I know you gotta drag us through the process before we get there, which is exhausting, by the way. But I'm not criticizing you, Rob. Understand?
No, it's interesting though, just to see where some of these stories come from and how they get morphed into their latest versions.
Yeah, I just wanted to I just wanted to let you all see the range of this guy's collative skills. Okay, when he's bringing everybody and their brother into this story, and he knows everybody. Okay, so of course he knew Mac Wallace too. Okay, so as the story goes, Mac Wallace was drinking heavily one day, not very long after the Kennedy assassination, and they were at a bar together. And he began whispering that Jack Ruby might have to be taken care of too, in quotes. He said you wanted to get away from him, but instead you were sent by Jake Miranda to a quieter area to talk to Wallace. Every time he gave Rodney McKenzie a few names, he went to the bathroom and he would scribble the names on a piece of paper in his pants pocket, and then he would go back and keep talking to Wallace until he said a couple more names. Then he would go back to the bathroom and scribble a couple more on this piece of paper in his pocket, and this is how he remembered everything that Mac Wallace told him.
Wow.
Okay.
Does he give any sort of a specific location where this occurred?
He does in his book, I think, but the article that I'm referencing, which is a much more condensed version and trying to get through 90 pages of information. But
I'm thinking he can't remember the date. There's always something that they that they can't remember that's totally necessary to try to verify it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And one thing really quickly here, I'm extending this hour a little bit. Normally I would take a break at this point, but I want Rob to finish this, please, because it is. I want to say one thing before you finish, though. When you started off by saying that this is in the league of Judith Berry Baker, I was very skeptical. I said to myself, like, come on, there's only one of those. Usually they kind of pick a lane and they stick to it. This guy is the highway just like she is, and I gotta tell you that you were absolutely correct. I was very skeptical of your statement there that she was that he was on the same level as her. But while I'm listening to this, and I'm sure there's more to it than you've even told us, nope. In fact, this guy might be giving her a real run for her money. I think
so.
Yeah, please finish though.
Okay, I got two more really highlights that I want to get off here before we take a break. Now, next he brings into the story. He says there was an old paperback called Appointment in Dallas by Hugh McDonald, which I'm sure we've talked about on the show before.
Yep.
Oh, God.
He actually got the FBI to do some editing for him in that book.
Nice. Yeah. And he fingered a guy named Saul, okay, in quotes, this mysterious figure Saul, as being a hitman, okay? Now, McDonald gives him full credit for the hit, and Mackenzie says, I don't buy him being the only hitter, but I do know that man. I met him at my Highland Avenue safe house, and he was with me for about 3 days and nights. A real prick, to say the least, and expensive taste, too. He had me running all over Dallas and Fort Worth for wine and designer shirts to his taste.
This is entertaining.
Yeah. He says that some guy named Joe Dugan had practiced the hit in Sulphur, Louisiana, under Mac Wallace's supervision at Mitch Werbel's training facility. Okay?
Jeez, he really does want to wrap everybody into this, doesn't he?
I'm not done. Here is the, what is it called, the denouement or whatever?
Coup de grace.
The coup de grace.
The coup de grace.
Okay. This is everybody that Roderick McKenzie says that Mac Wallace told him was involved in the assassination. Okay, you're all ready for this. Okay, in the command area on the second floor of the Texas School Book Depository were Cliff Carter, LBJ's, what was he? His advisor or like his assistant. Okay, Carlos Marcello, Jack Rubenstein, and George Reese. Now he says in the video that he understands that it's been alleged that Carlos Marcello was supposed to be in court at the time in Louisiana, but that it actually ended earlier, and David Ferry flew him to Dallas so he could be here and witness the assassination. Okay.
Oh, wow.
In the alley behind the fence and above the so-called grassy knoll were Clyde Faust, John Ernst, Jack Grimm, and Joseph Dugan. Never heard of one of these guys before. Okay. Whatever. Under the bridge, in case the president was not shot, and above the railroad area were Charles Harrelson, Chauncey Holt, Charles Rogers, and a man named Dimitri from Reverend Bowen's assassination school in Mexico. Okay? On the roof of the county records building, we have Harry Weatherford, Roger Craig, Richard Scalzetti, and Michael Victor Mertz, better known as, what's the guy's name?
Jean Soutre.
Yes.
Yeah.
Famed assassin. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. now, remember that I just said that he puts Richard Scalzetti on the top of the county records building. Okay, just file that away for a second.
Oh, wait, he put Roger Craig up there too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they hated each other. Roger Craig. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And up on the sixth floor of the schoolbook depository, in the nest and other setup areas, was a woman named Ruth Ann Martinez. Lee Harvey Oswald, who was under a spell, according to Mac Wallace. Mac Wallace and Lawrence Lloyd Factor, okay? In the Daltex building, the team was supposed to be on top but had problems reaching the roof. It was Eugene Hale Brading, Frank Fiorini Sturgis, Raphael Chichi Quintero, and Richard Kane. Now, isn't Richard Kane the same as Richard Scalzetti?
Yeah. He must have messed that up. Scalzetti was the fake name that he used. Kane was his actual name.
Maybe he was in two places at once. Maybe this guy was awesome like that.
You had to have hit 14 or 15. That it's really. This is what's funny too is he just also happened to
was drunk.
Nice.
I mean, so maybe he made a mistake. But
that's a lot of people to fit in the closet at the Daltex building, isn't it? Because it was like, never mind. I'm sorry. I threw something else in there.
And here's an interesting question. Why didn't anyone else see any of those people?
Well, we do have a smattering. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, besides Brading. You know what? Out of that whole list, out of the 15 or 16 people, Brading was there to see his parole officer. So, yes, he was there. Well, but as far as the rest of them go, I don't know of any witness that said they saw those people hanging out.
Well, in fairness, Roger Craig was nearby.
Sure, he was, but he wasn't in the building, to my knowledge.
I didn't. I said nearby.
Wow. Well, this guy Jack Ruby might have been nearby, and he could have been at home. It doesn't. It makes no sense. There's so many conflicts. And Marcello, really? He ran. Yeah. They were celebrating after his trial. So what? Did Ferry get loaded and then go get a plane and they decided they were going to fly real quick? They could have made it in time. It ended right around the time when, maybe an hour and a half before the assassination.
Yeah, I know. That's what makes it all the better.
Yeah.
And he has the gall as he's wrapping up this interview. He says, and I quote, "When I read the misinformation about what I saw as a simple killing of an important person, I wonder at the stupidity of the general public."
Now that part I believe.
He's also been a guest on The Real Deal with Jim Fetzer, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, wait a minute. Yes. So have I once.
We all make mistakes, man. We all make mistakes.
I
tried to talk to him once. I tried to talk to Fetzer once. Didn't work out.
Yeah, we did that together, didn't we? It didn't work out too well. Rob, and all of this, in all of this that you're talking about, because I'm literally rubbing my temples here while I'm talking to you. In all of this that we're talking about, is the mechanism by which LBJ is involved, just the Mac Wallace thing, or is it like across the board?
Yeah, well, I mean, Mac Wallace was LBJ's personal hitman, of course, because that's what Billy Solesti said. So that's what they've said, and this guy's heard the stories. He's heard the Chauncey Holt stories. Holt was in the circus. I'm sure he might have even known him at some point. It's not a stretch for this guy just to start pulling pieces from everything And he might have been near the right place at the right time. He might have even been in Dallas in 1963. I don't know. There's nothing to confirm or deny it. And it just might be like one of those people who was close to history and now inserts himself in it because it gives him attention that he never would have gotten before. I mean, he would just be another old man, whittling away on the couch somewhere that nobody cares about. And now, he's got 30,000 people watching these videos on YouTube and buying into everything that they're saying. So, yeah. And you should read the comment section too. I mean, it's like, this they're praising him for, all his information and thanking him, God, he's still alive to tell his story and all this and that, just like the rest of them, But yeah, I just found that fascinating that this guy gets so many views, and this is why, you take a show like mine and yours, and the information that we put out there to the community, and then put it up. You can't compete with this. You can't compete with the professor who's getting 8,000 views on every video he does every week.
Well, yeah. What we get is Judy Baker's a mother. I literally got one of those comments recently. It was like, Judy Baker's a mom. So, and I'm like,
did they finish that word, or they just said mother?
There you go. I'm going to go to a short break because I need to recover. But before I do, Steve, is this not a perfect illustration of, well, this is where I can say again, I do not blame you for concluding that Oswald did it, because regardless of what you think of that case, it's not this. So, we can argue about the particulars of reality a little bit and interpretations, but what do you have to say about this? I don't even know is this a myth or is this a joke? I'm not sure. I'm at a loss. I mean,
it's being presented as fact, and that's the problem.
Oh yeah,
and people laugh it up.
Oh yeah, that's precisely the problem. But I'm just trying to talk to Steve here and go, I know you're laughing and I'm laughing too, but at the same time, isn't it scary that somebody's going to take that seriously? And also just a quick impression of it before we go to break.
Well, yeah, it's very entertaining from you and all of us here, but for people that are new that come in here, like Rob has pointed out, 28,000 views or hits on a YouTube video. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't know anything about this, and of course they get sucked in there. So what you have in this so-called community is a bunch of charlatans, and Hook and Chauncey Ho, Tosh Plumley, there's another fake artist, Baker and the rest, they're scamming for money. That's all they're doing. They know it's BS, and but they count on drive-bys that people they're not really focused in on the information like all of us here, but that's what they're counting on. So, and what they do is they put them up on those websites and they get hits. And when they get hits, they get advertising. So, like Hook and all that crap, and another one, Sin K, is another one of those weird guys. But there's an artistry behind this BS, and you gotta admire it when you look at it and you see how the scam is working, and it's on purpose. It's meant to suck a lot of people in, and the bigger the lie, like Hitler said, the bigger the lie, or not Hitler, but Goebbels, yeah, and all that. So that's what's going on here, and there's no secret to it, and so we laugh about it, but believe it or not, these people are getting sucked in big time on this BS. And anyway, that's all I have to say about it.
No, I hear you. And look, you can shape dog crap into the formation that greatly resembles a Rodin sculpture, but at the end of the day, it's still a lot of dog crap. Carmine, your impression before we actually go right into the break. Of course, you're listening to the 13th episode of JFK Myths, JFK Assassination Myths here, and we don't have the kind of traffic that some of the myth makers have, but we actually have some information to offer and some realistic discussions to be had regarding the evidence on the case. I am flabbergasted at the amalgamation of nonsense that Rob just described. And again, to be fair, Rob probably did not describe it in depth, actually. He probably just gave us the snapshot we needed. But again, I'm not sure I even needed this because it's beyond confusing and bizarre to me. But Carmine, your thoughts?
Well, it's nice to know that there's somebody out there trying to work just as hard as Judith Baker and some of the other myth makers out there, because this guy doesn't seem to have taken any opportunity he could to roll something into his story. And I would hope that everyone listening, you know what, I would rather have smaller numbers of reasonable people, because the people that are supporting them I don't think will ever believe some solid evidence. And I think, your listeners do. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that we can reach, and we're making progress. But unfortunately, we got to wade through all of this to try and keep the shoe level to make progress.
That's the truth, Carmine. But we're going to continue to wade through the whatever it is you want to call it as we continue on with the Myths episode. Stay tuned to the Ochelli Effect. We'll be right back after this short break.
WallStreetWindow.com. Gold, silver, the stock market. WallStreetWindow.com. The brilliant author of The War State brings you exclusive reports about the big changes upcoming in the markets. WallStreetWindow.com. Perhaps you're invested deeply. Perhaps you're not in deep enough. Maybe you're thinking about getting started. WallStreetWindow.com. Michael Swanson, the brilliant author of The War State, understood these trends professionally for many years, and now he gives you the benefit of his knowledge. WallStreetWindow.com. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now.
Ochelli.
Second hour of the Ochelli Effect begins now here at Ochelli.com, where we do not get the traffic of this latest interesting myth maker that we just discussed in the last hour plus of the show. Dear God, help me, I want to forget it. But anyway, Rob Clark from the Lone Gunman podcast brought that one to us, who is with us tonight for the 13th episode of JFK Assassination Myths, along with Steve Rowe, an interesting and very well thought out gentleman who I'm happy to have along, and my co-host on Thursdays, author Carmine Savastano, who is here nearly every Thursday and is the longest standing co-host on the Ochelli Effect. But look, it's not about me tonight. Like I said, we don't get that kind of traffic at Ochelli.com or when I put things up on YouTube or anything, but the quality is a lot better than the quantity. Of course, we just get a little bit of help from people who appreciate our work every now and then, and you can support Rob by going and checking things out on Spreaker right now, and I don't know, maybe there'll be a website in the future, and we'll see where else we can get the Lone Gunman podcast distributed. Of course, I always advise people to buy Carmine's book, take a look at it, examine it, concise review of 3 assassinations, 2 princes, and a king. So, we were on the LBJ topic, believe it or not, despite the merry-go-round you were just on at the circus during the discussion in the last hour plus. But I'm going to turn it back over to Carmine, and we'll try and close out the topic of LBJ in short order, because I'd like to get to one of those other presidents mentioned real quick. So, Carmine, I turn it back to you, sir.
Okay. Well, yeah. So after the Mackenzie allegations that we just heard from Rob,
I like how Carmine is still stunned by what he had to listen to last hour. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's sort of like recovering from like a dead shot to the face. You need a few seconds afterwards.
Yeah.
However, it was not just domestic sources that sought to take advantage of anti-Johnson sentiment. Years before any of the modern allegations regarding Johnson were more popular, the Havana Domestic Television Service had seized upon claims that LBJ was responsible for President Kennedy's assassination. Using statements likely inspired or at least reviewed by Cuban intelligence, the Cuban Intelligence Service, the DGI, or the Dirección General Inteligencia, appeared in a live television program aired November 22nd, 1966 in Cuba, in a report. The report states, "This is the third anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy, and it is being officially ignored. The Johnson administration has not scheduled any commemoration ceremony. However, while presidential births and notable historic events are sometimes celebrated, there never has been any enduring, repeated public ceremony marking the death of past executives every year undertaken by prior White Houses, as well as on the exact date of the assassination. The tone of this program begins with the accusatory claims of disrespect, but provides no example of this same action being paid yearly to any other past assassinated executive." The program continues. "The anniversary is characterized by the sharp tone of the controversy on the investigations, which divides those who doubt the results of them into those who believe Lee Harvey Oswald was the scapegoat for a great plot of oil millionaires, those who think that Oswald participated but had accomplices, and those who believe that there were several persons who fired on the president, none of them Oswald. Even the great weeklies Life and Time disagree. The first expressed doubts and believes that a new investigation should be opened. Time believes that the Warren Commission report puts an end to it. The show further claims suspicion has always hung over the assassination. There was the doubt that if it was Oswald because of the many maneuvers used by Texas police to implicate him and the way in which he was liquidated on television. Today, the cloud that hangs over the assassination points to no less than Lyndon Johnson himself as the one who benefited most from the crime. However, I would contend that claim, which, as many know, is a popular one. Lyndon Johnson was not the person who most benefited. Johnson, following the death of President Kennedy, acquired a small portion of Kennedy's remaining term before facing re-election. He inherited the Vietnam War, civil rights conflicts, and was under suspicion from the moment he became president, not based on evidence, but on his dishonest past and his government and a government and press filled with Kennedy supporters who viewed him as a pretender to the throne. However, unlike challenges Johnson faced that eventually forced him to serve a single term and retire, J. Edgar Hoover received a lifetime appointment to lead the FBI under Johnson. This would be the only non-Supreme Court lifetime executive branch appointment in U.S. history. The program, I'm sorry, you want to say something, Chuck?
Well, no, it's always interesting when this is brought up. Key bono, right? Who benefited? People bring up all the time, and it's fascinating because Johnson's benefits not really that great as far as I'm concerned. He didn't have longevity. He was enriched long before this. His criminal past was not even well known. I think the suspicions were mainly born of the fact that it happened in his home state. Where he would have had some influence, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible here. It seems like, listen, it would be a means by which someone could have some suspicion of Lyndon Baines Johnson. He ascended to the presidency. It was his home state. His friends were present. He might have had some influence over the police. He might have had influence over local circumstance. This is... Sure. Where things are sort of logical, but then we go into the bizarre and odd. Steve, please, I'd like you to add to that.
Chuck, I was a kid when that happened in Dallas, and I was 8 years old. And when it first broke out, when he was killed, there were so many rumors going around about Johnson. Johnson did it, basically. Because Johnson was not well liked in Dallas at all. He was hated, very hated. And despite from Texas, but, he's from Central Texas. But those rumors rarely originated from day one. I mean, not day one, but hour one, hour two. So that's a lot of genesis of that stuff come from,
Well, right, but that's my point, is that, look, for one reason or another, I'm talking about the rest of the nation, let's say, could view it in the way that I just put it out there because this is one of the things that I wasn't alive at that time, but many people have told me that this was one of the initial sort of thoughts that was out there. And there's a variety of reasons for it. And his criminality was not even well known internationally, nationally, until later, really, despite the fact that there was indeed an investigation going on. There was other things that were happening that were around this time period. I don't think the public was well informed about that, but the idea that these rumors began is sort of logical, but then it spins into another direction, Carmine.
Yeah. No, I think the big problem is they're not unreasonable speculations, but they are just speculations. And people like McKenzie and others that we've discussed built huge stories with little to no evidence just based on their speculations and some unlegible documents from a overseas trade company. So that doesn't do the trick. You have to, if we really want to solve something, we have to demonstrate every element of the crime, as we would have to in a court of law.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to demonstrate every element of the crime. You can't just say this random person, that knew this guy who they had met once, did this and that, and well, I have no witnesses, well, I have no real evidence, well, then you have nothing. So
right, and look, even if you don't, if you can't establish a full-blown legal case, I would like some pieces of it. And outside of the declarations of some rather nefarious and interesting con men over the years, and, well, I guess con women, con persons, not sure what the politically correct way to do that is. But anyway, whatever, con people, how about that, over the years, ranging from Billy Celestes to apparently this guy that Rob was talking about to, well, Ms. Baker, whatever, outside of these things, what do you have, actually? Well, there's Mac Wallace, and, the Mac Wallace connection, see Joan Mellon on that, first of all. Second of all, even if you have this guy, it doesn't mean that, even if you could connect him, even if you could connect Wallace to the case, which you can't, in a legal sense, in a realistic sense to the case, outside of the declarations of people that are putting him in teams. I forget where Mac Wallace was. Was he drunk, Rob? I forget from that. Never mind. The point is that even if you can put him there, you still would have to make the connection and show the whole thing related to LBJ directing it, requesting it. You'd have to put all that together still, and you don't have a shooter, you don't have the connection, you don't have a declaration, you don't have proof of anything that is dispositive of LBJ being anything but, again, my wildest speculation here is that perhaps he was told that he would soon be president. That is my wildest speculation, is that somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said, Kennedy's not going to be there soon. Maybe. And that's as far as I'm willing to go, and I think I might be the wildest speculator on the call here tonight. But anyway, Carmine, please continue. I'd like to finish with LBJ because we got another one to tackle.
Okay. The most notable myth in this document is the claim that has no verification, and I hadn't heard prior until reading this specific document, which stated that Jackie Kennedy was wandering around and came upon Lyndon Johnson on the telephone talking to a Texas lawyer about how to take over and speeding up the swearing-in ceremony. Mm-hmm. However, this event, based on evidence, did not occur. While Mrs. Kennedy could have come upon President Johnson discussing the assumption of office, his conversation would not have been with a mysterious lawyer, but with Robert Kennedy, as prior offered in evidence would state. This attempt to render Johnson's phone call nefarious does not comport with the facts.
Doesn't comport with the witnesses that I personally interviewed either, which would tell me that she was pretty much glued to a seat outside of the trauma room for the majority of the time anybody was tracking where she was. During the events at Parkland Hospital, outside of the time that she actually went in the room and did some other things, which there are a couple of different accounts of. But anyway, interesting that they have her wandering around, because that's new to me as well. Carmine, go ahead.
Okay, so that's the end of the first one, and the last thing concerning Johnson which we will be able to go through rather quickly because it's anonymous. So its credibility, I would say, should be quite suspect. And then once you here's another first as far as claims that I haven't heard before. So one rather improbable plot emerged from an anonymous letter sent to the FBI. The letter had no fingerprints of value to identify the owner, who states, quote, President Johnson conspired with communist agents for the assassination of President Kennedy. The deal was for him to become president in return for his aiding and abetting Russia in their subversion of the United States.
Paging Bob Bear. Okay, never mind. Carmine, yikes. I've never heard of Johnson being alleged to have been collaborating with... Oh, wait a minute, collaborating with the Russians. That sounds familiar. But interesting that Johnson would... Come on already. I mean, for commentary here... I don't even want to go to Steve Rowe. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna go to Rob Clark. Rob.
Yes.
Your thoughts, sir.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just as ridiculous as all the other stuff we've talked about here tonight. From what we do know about what Johnson thought or what he supposedly knew, from his conversations with J. Edgar Hoover and stuff, he really didn't have a clue until maybe later on in life. He maybe had some doubts about the official story and about Oswald's ties to either Castro or the Russians. But as far as he himself being tied to him, that's just way out there.
Let me ask an odd question to Steve Rowe and also to Rob and then to Carmine really quickly. Steve, have you ever known somebody that you were closely associated with that was murdered? I mean, I know this sounds like a bizarre question, but humor me for a moment. Have you ever known somebody that was, provably absolutely murdered that you were rather close to?
Yes, I have, believe it or not.
Oh, no, I believe you. But here's the thing.
I don't want to go into details.
No. I don't want details. I have one follow-up question for you, and I'm going to ask everybody the same thing if they answer in the affirmative. You will have a variety of thoughts afterwards regarding that individual, the circumstances, etc., and all of that, which will evolve over time that quite in just the bluntest of fashion here, have nothing to do with the circumstances that actually went on here. But you could wind up with all sorts of conclusions, ideas, concepts, thoughts, regrets, etc. A wide range of things can go on in your mind afterwards. You would have to agree with that, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, that's absolutely. As far as I want to go.
When something like that happens, it's everybody equates it to personally. Was I responsible? What am I connected? And that's what happens a lot when you something tragic or big and tragic like it happens. So.
Oh yeah.
But it's not unusual. It's not unusual, Chuck.
Yeah, no, I don't want to dig deep on you. I'm now going to add my voice to this and tell you that, quite honestly, a lot of things will go on in your mind afterwards. You may make utterly odd statements about it. You may make some emotional statements about it. You may make some very strange statements about it because it's an interesting kind of thing that happens here when this occurs. So, Johnson's post-assassination statements could be born of a great many things aside from any of his direct involvement just by being so close to the individual. I mean, he was not, I'm not saying that these guys were best friends. I'm saying that he was working with him. He was definitely tied to him. He was definitely interacting with John F. Kennedy and his family on some level. A lot of thoughts could enter his mind afterwards that have nothing to do with his culpability in the case. Rob, I ask you the same question, though. Have you ever personally known somebody or worked with someone or been in close association with somebody who's been murdered?
No, not straight out murdered. Maybe negligent homicide.
Fair enough.
To that effect, yeah.
Fair enough. Result is the same, though, Rob. I guarantee you that the result is the same. Everything that both Steve and I just said, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I mean, you're going to run over 1,000 scenarios in your head. You're going to come to a bunch of different conclusions at different times the more you think about it. And it's just, I completely understand that point of view. And coming from Johnson's perspective, this is a guy who's, all of a sudden he's president, and let's just assume for a second that he didn't have anything to do with this. The guy in front of him just got his head blown off in broad daylight in the middle of his home state, and now he's the president. Okay, he's going to have a million questions running through his head. Will I be next? When will it happen to me? What do I need to do different to make sure it doesn't happen to me? Just
right.
Run the whole gamut of things.
Right. Even in the most cold-blooded, egocentric way possible, okay, in Johnson's circumstance, you could say, you know what? The guy who just had the job that I now have is dead. Perhaps this could happen to me if you're not involved in and that will begin to change somebody's thinking, perspective, and attitude a great deal. Carmine, I passed the question to you, and I guess it's not necessarily that somebody's been murdered. Rob just gave me a scenario that would have the same result. If someone dies suddenly, who you are dealing with on a continuous basis, you have some proximity to in a working relationship, other relationship, doesn't matter. Would you agree that we've characterized this accurately?
Yeah, I've lost someone close, and it was a negligent homicide. It wasn't necessarily anyone's direct fault, but there were mistakes made in medical procedures, and they died. So yeah, I definitely think you can, and you still it lessens over time, but you once in a while you'll always think about that person, and I think that. You're going to all the stages of grief. Blame is one of them, where you blame yourself.
Right.
Where you deny that it happened, where you try to make deals about it, and eventually, hopefully for everyone, it lessens in time and with perspective. But yeah, you're of course going to think about every little nuance you could have, how you could have changed things. Is it your fault? Even when you have no direct, that's, like with divorces, they always tell the kids not to blame themselves because that's a natural reaction. Mm-hmm. Is that you're going to blame yourself even if you have no role whatsoever to play in it. So it doesn't surprise me. People were angry. People wanted someone to blame, and he's an easy target. But once again, he's literally an easy target. He's in the firing range. He was worried that someone was going to kill him. If you want to think that he's a self-important person, that's fine. But one of the things about being self-important is you worry about yourself.
Well, yeah.
Johnson was worried.
Well, see, and now you've actually struck upon my final point, which is whether you believe that he had foreknowledge or was involved or was not involved and this was a complete surprise, you have very good evidence of this guy going through a lot of an odd process where it's definitely tied not only to that sudden removal of an individual that you're accustomed to having in your life for one reason or another, but you also see a bit over time things change a bit. That interview with Cronkite, if you take a look at the expressions, the body language, the fact that he shifts his positions, says what he says, everything. Okay, it seems entirely legitimate to me that he would have also had to consider at some point, again, doesn't matter what level of knowledge or lack thereof you think he had, indeed in a completely factual way. He's in the line of fire in Dallas. He could have been hit even if that wasn't the intent. He could have been hit if it was the lone gunman. He could have been hit if it was these, ridiculous circus shooting team that Rob was talking. The point is that he's got proximity and he has the threat of danger combined, which forms a lot of interesting things. And quite honestly, if you look at his behavior post-assassination, I would say that it's completely natural, does not reveal to me the actions of somebody. Here's the psychology lesson for you. If this was a guilty guy, this is not the way he behaves. These are not the questions he asks. These are not the statements he makes. he would seek to protect himself and seek not to speak about it at all, maybe. But we don't see that. We see him actually making some interesting statements that mean that there were lingering questions. So regardless, there's something askew here about cold-blooded mastermind LBJ, even in an objective sort of psychological observational way. Okay? Now, that's the end of what I want to talk about there. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I just want to interject there. Sorry. And there's people out there pushing that LBJ did it crap. Roger Stone is one. He wrote a whole book on it, and along with others. But and one of the myths that they propagate was LBJ ducked when those shots were firing, and they based that off the Alkins number 6 photo. And when you look at that photo, when you really study it, it was pointed out to me by some pretty savvy people, he wasn't ducking. Now, if he was ducking, your interpretation of that photo, how come his Lady Bird's not ducking with him? So, but you look at that, but that's one of those myths that's been riding on LBJ. Well, he ducked. Well, he didn't duck. You know, you can look at it, and I'll show you sometime when you look at it. Somebody showed it to me. It took me a while to figure it out. But no, he did not duck, and he did not anticipate a shot. You know, he's sitting with his wife, LBJ, Lady Bird, and Ralph Yarborough over there. So, But anyway, no, that's all I had to say about that. But Roger Stone's out there promoting that crap.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because, you know, he doesn't want to acknowledge the fact that Rufus Youngblood is on top of him, like literally within a moment of that photograph, because guess what? You know, if you put the sequence together when that photograph was taken and you take a look at the film, I think it was Rufus Youngblood. I think I have that name correct. That would be the Secret Service agent who was in charge of protecting Johnson in that particular moment, for sure. And I'm pretty sure that was the guy who was on top of him that he was arguing with, like, get the hell off of me, pretty much. And, you know, he did his job, by the way. But, you know, would that have been so necessary, and would that whole wrestling match have occurred if Johnson was indeed ducking? A lot of people bring up the wink, too, right, Steve? You know, the whole thing from the series of photos on what would be Air Force One with the president aboard when he was sworn in. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that Albert Thomas was the famous wink on Air Force One with Johnson. You know, everybody's seen it. You know, there's some type of conspiracy behind that. But Albert Thomas was the night before in Houston, Texas, was honored by President Kennedy, and Kennedy considered him a loyal Democrat, a high-level deal. You know, but there again, when people look at photographs, the Richard Hook type, they start reading in stories, you know, but that's just not true. I mean, but that photograph is interesting because when you look at it before, there was there's a lot of series of those photographs from Cecil Stoughton, the White House photographer, took those. But there's a lot of photographs when they look completely different, you know. So, but anyway, people think that, you know, Albert Thomas and LBJ, you know, there it is, you know, I got my job now, you know, it worked, you know, and all that stuff. They read so much into these photographs, but it's so stupid that it's beyond comprehension. But anyway, go ahead, John.
Well, and there was a book some years ago that gave us a pretty good glimpse at the sequence of those photographs. People have attempted to insert other images that don't appear to actually be photographed by Stoughton into the discussion as well. And some of those images on the internet are actually cropped, altered somewhat, etc. And besides, once again, context would help here. Right? You don't exactly know. I mean, yeah, we have the dictabelt recording of the swearing in, but we don't really know the conversations that were going on. Some people, was dead silent. I doubt that highly, that nobody spoke a word to anybody else. I mean, some people might have been stunned and certainly been silent, and it might have been a lot quieter than usual with all those people sort of crammed into that little area. And I doubt that Jackie Kennedy was very talkative, but it doesn't mean that there was no conversation going on and no context for what was happening there. So again, you have a small piece of evidence that somebody has taken and woven into a story. But even if there was this, hey, it's all good now, sentiment being exchanged, it's proof of absolutely nothing. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. We're actually running a bit low on time. If you guys want, we can extend this just a touch because I do want to get to the other president we wanted to talk about here. What do you guys think? You got a couple extra minutes?
Sure. Good. Sure. Okay.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll take it into overtime just a little bit, but when I put out the podcast, I will put out the regular podcast, but we'll make it available on the stream in whole, and I'll also put it in the members section because for distribution purposes, the show has to be 2 hours long. I'll figure out a way to do it. Anyway, the last president that we want to deal with here on the 13th episode of Myths is Carmine?
George Herbert Walker Bush. And I'll turn it over to Steve first, and then I'll just add the little addition I have on that. But I think the more pressing matters we should address should start with Steve.
Well, we will start with Steve, and why is it that we need to tackle this? Well, because we're confronted on the internet continuously with here we go, hate to name names, but Russ Baker type guys who like to tell us that there is an image of George H.W. Bush in Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination. There he is, literally either just having fired a shot, which, okay, or just observing because he's meant to be there to observe, and even confronted with images of a character alleged to be George W. Bush at the time of the assassination in Dealey Plaza. Those two images float around out there, despite the fact that if one is to fully examine a photo array of various images from various angles in Dealey Plaza, one will find that based on certain things that are created by the optical illusions often presented in photography of the time, you can find characters, resembling lots of different people until you see them at multiple angles, and you recognize that some things are clearer than others, and some things, the very same character at one angle might appear to slightly resemble George H.W. Bush, but if you follow that character around and track them through the photos, guess what? They don't. Jack Ruby is another one who's supposed to be there, pictured in Dealey Plaza at the time. We've talked about other figures supposed to be pictured in Dealey Plaza at the time. But George H.W. Bush is definitely one of those interesting ones because, after all, he was tied to the CIA. And, yes, he was, in fact, the director of the CIA for a year under, well, wait a minute, President Ford, over a decade later. But anyway, because of all that, people love to bring this one up. And with that, now I turn it to Steve Rowe. Steve, first of all, what's the problem with that photograph? I think I already told everybody. But what's the problem with trying to put George H.W. Bush in Dealey Plaza exactly?
Because he wasn't there.
Oh, okay.
Let me ask you this. Can you raise your hand of all the people that love George Bush? I think you'd be stretched to find one, But anyway, that
I just sat on both of my hands, just so you know. Go ahead.
That photo Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, that photo that it was taken by Willie Allen there, of Dallas Times Herald photographer. But it does resemble it, yeah, from an angle. But I know Rob covered this with Doug Campbell in his podcast. Very good. And Rob can add to the photo part of it. But George he came into Dallas the night before. He was giving a speech. He was staying at the Sheraton Hotel down from Elm Street down there, and he was giving a speech at the API, which is American Petroleum Institute. It's oil field stuff, and he gave it. And then the next day, I don't know if he flew out or if he traveled, but I know he flew back. But he went to Tyler, and people don't believe that, but he gave a speech at the Blackstone Hotel in downtown Tyler, which is no longer there. And during the assassination, when it was pointed out to him that when he was up there giving his speech, they had heard all the scuttlebutt, and then he had to stop the speech and then stop. But anyway, you mentioned Russ Baker, and what a scam artist he is with who, what, and where. And but he was on Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theories and all that BS, and they put the photo up there. But you'll never catch Russ Baker saying yes, he was there. He just puts it out there and lets it dribble by like a lot of these con artists do. But anyway, years back, I heard so much of this BS that, here's a guy that served his country. He was a fighter pilot. Well, he wasn't a fighter pilot, I'm sorry. He was a torpedo pilot for the Navy. He was serving on off the Pacific Ocean there when he was shot down after delivering a torpedo. And he's the youngest Navy pilot of record that I know in World War II. He was 18 years old when he came out, and he was so good that he taught aviation school up in Michigan, and he went on after the war. He married Barbara Bush, right? And then he completed his education at Yale. And then he went to Texas. But Bush is not a Texas native. He's what we used to call carpetbaggers, right? But, he ended up in the oil industry. In fact, he was not just in Texas. He went to California. And he was in the service industry, in the oil industry. And then he started around 53 in West Texas and went into business. But, of course, George Bush was the son of Preston Bush, Senator Preston Bush. So, anyway.
Prescott, yeah.
I'm sorry, Prescott, yes. I said Preston. I was thinking the governor of Texas there. Mm-hmm. But Prescott. But he went on to start Zapata. Well, actually, he started another oil company before that, but that in the Midland Odessa area. And then he started Zapata with a few other people. And Zapata was named after the movies Viva Zapata, where him and his partners went out and saw that movie back in the 50s. With Marlon Brando. And anyway, they started that company. It started out in oil, and then they drifted over to the drilling side of it as a drilling contractor with offshore drilling and Zapata Offshore.
Well, and another thing to enter here, Steve, is that literally on a map of Cuba of the time, one could find, I think it's an isthmus, which is also named Zapata. not far from where the oil company is supposed to be operating. So, it's almost like saying, hey, I'm Key West sandwiches, and hey, you were near Key West. Yeah, maybe. There's a lot of reasons. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I believe from our prior conversation, I can't remember all the details, but Emilio Zapata was the name of the legendary local leader they named that area after. So there were people named Zapata in Cuba in the 1800s.
Yeah, which,
things got named after them.
Yeah, okay. There you go. There's a lot of reasons, and Steve brings up another interesting reason why the oil company might have been named. Now, the problem is that a lot of people say that the Bay of Pigs operation was called Operation Zapata, which indeed it may have been. And I'll even go with that for the sake of this discussion. But it doesn't mean that is proof that he's involved with the Bay of Pigs. I mean...
No, that's right. And I think Rob and Doug Campbell covered that pretty good in their episode. What was it called, Rob? Beating the Bushies or whatever?
Yeah, that was it, Beating the Bushies. I don't know what number it was, but yeah. That's it.
Yeah. So they go into that deal.
Right.
But anyway, Bush had there's another crook called Fletcher Prouty, and he's another charlatan. So he also interjected another deal about the Barbara J, which was, of course, named after Barbara Bush in Houston. There were boats used in the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Right.
So that added fuel to the fire. But anyway, you can see this gathering fuel to fire, with Bush and all this BS. But anyway, I did a little research on that, and I found out from a 1961 article by Drew Pearson that the Barbara J was named after a skipper, a drunk skipper on that Bay of Pigs stuff, who just named this boat Barbara J after his wife. It had nothing to do with Zapata drilling, and it wasn't Zapata drilling boats or nothing like that. In fact, the Houston was another one Pearson talks about. But anyway, that's all this stuff. You just kind of urban myths, to gather steam and everything like that. But getting to the point here, Bush was not in Dallas during the assassination, and anyway, I looked into this kind of hard. I was called the George Bush Library, Presidential Library down in College Stations down there, which is the home of Texas A&M. And I talked to the head librarian, the archivist down there, and I said, hey, look, do you have any articles about George Bush being in Tyler? I want to verify, was he in Tyler or was he not in Tyler? But, so anyway, they said, yeah, we'll check it out. And so a couple of days later, got back with me, and he said, yeah, all we have is these articles where he was traveling. He was, he declared himself a candidate for the 1964 Texas Senator run. He was running for the Republican primary, which was going to be against the Democratic incumbent, Ralph Yarborough. So anyway, Bush was pretty much unknown at that time. He headed up the Harris County Republican party down there, which is in Houston. So he broke out, here's this carpetbagger, as we used to call him, run around East Texas, West Texas, and everything, trying to get his name out. So anyway, when I talked to him about it, I said, well, you got any newspaper articles about it? And they said, well, we'll check it out. So anyway, they called me back a couple of days later, and they said, well, I have this, but I have a photograph here which I don't know. Here, you can take a look at it. And this photo was of Bush at the Kiwanis Club. And Bush was at the Kiwanis Club in Tyler giving a speech when that assassination happened. And that's documented in Barbara Bush's book called Memoirs. And a couple of researchers, I think Ed Ledoux, is that right, Rob? Ledoux, how you pronounce this guy's name?
Yeah, Casey Ed Ledoux, yep.
Yeah. Well, they actually, years ago, contacted and ran down this deal about the Bush being there, and they contacted a guy named Aubrey Irby, which was, at that time, I think he was maybe a district Kiwanis Club guy. Anyway, he was at that Bush speech, and these guys wrote up a deal about it, and I think Lancer kind of included it. But they documented where Bush got up and made this speech, and he stopped during that speech when he got word of it. But they documented it, and Barbara Bush documented it. I didn't have any firm documentation, but anyway, they produced this picture, and there was a guy standing in front of a podium, Bush, with a Kiwanis banner in front.
Right.
And on top was called, somebody had written, I didn't write it, they wrote Tyler. And here recently I've been correspondence with the Tyler Kiwanis Club head over there, and they said, well, yeah, there was two Kiwanis Club deals. There was a breakfast club and there was a luncheon club. If you look at that photo carefully, Chuck, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but anyway,
yes, I have.
That photo has you can look at it, there's a couple of salad dishes over there hanging around. So it was a luncheon club, so that pretty much.
Well, and one more thing to throw in here, which Steve knows well, I'm sure, is that Barbara Bush, okay, why would it be the Barbara J on that ship? Is it Barbara Bush's middle name, Chuck? No, because if memory serves me correctly, Barbara Bush didn't have a middle name. But anyway, either way, I know it's not a J, and was her maiden name a J, Steve?
No, it's Pierce, Barbara Pierce.
Oh, right. So does that J make any kind of sense related directly to Barbara Bush?
Fletcher Prouty, it did.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just asking you. I can't ask Fletcher. He died in 2001. But
I also wanted to add to what Steve said, because the way that I came across part of this, like Steve came across the picture and actually contacted the library, I came across an older book that was called Ordinary and Extraordinary People Recall Their Reactions When They Heard the News by this author, Jody Elliott Hansen, and she wrote to Bush. And one of the references we have for tonight is an article I did, and I have a copy of the letter that he wrote to her to say that he was at the club in the 80s when he wrote back to her. And in her book, she actually interviews Irby, the person that Steve mentioned, and they tell her that they were sitting right by Bush watching him. At the time the assistant came in and let them know what happened, they told Bush. Bush quickly excused himself and sat down and said he shouldn't continue in light of the events. So you got a room full of people.
Yeah, right. Right, and photograph to show that obviously the Breakfast Club wouldn't have been eating salad. So, here we go. I mean, there's no end to how people can stretch the blurred image of something into something else. I mean, is George H.W. Bush a nefarious character in a lot of people's minds? Well, if you're used to listening to my show, you know he is in my mind. But can we hang this specific crime on him? Not if we have evidence that seems to be dispositive of him even being present, which eliminates, opportunity. Motive, well, question it any way you want. Means, well, might be eliminated by distance as well, unless you're assuming that by some amalgamation he was the mastermind of the plot and was in Tyler, Texas on purpose to be just that close to it. I don't know what to tell you, but it just doesn't work.
Again, I just wanted to add in, which again makes no sense. It's the same thing with Johnson. You don't want to be at the crime scene. You don't want to be anywhere near the crime scene. You want to be as far away from the crime scene as you possibly can be.
Yeah, which means that George Bush, if he was really involved, George H.W. Bush, should have been on vacation in, I don't know, Europe. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, I was just going to say that, well, I'm sure you guys, you've seen the meme where George Bush doesn't remember where he was on November 22nd, 1963, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah, I've seen that one pushed around.
That's another fallacy.
Exactly. Another myth busted. Ba-bam.
Yeah, only two people don't know where they were that day. One of them is George H.W. Bush, and the other one is I forget who. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is probably Howard Hunt. Yeah, I think you're right. Doesn't matter.
We know where he was too. So he was in Washington.
My next point. We know where he was also being told something in Washington. Now you can argue about what he was being told or why or whatever else, but the fact is Washington a bit too far from Dallas even today to be involved in the assassination at the time that Hunt is provably there. So sorry, St. John.
Maybe Dave Ferry came up and flew him in too.
Well, he was a hell of a pilot, wasn't he? He was a hell of a pilot, and a hell of a pilot. Yeah. A lot of other things apparently too. Okay, guys, I want to go around the table here, and I'll end with Carmine, but let's begin with Rob. Rob, what do you think about what we've covered in this episode? Do you think we did a fair enough job to tackle a couple of interesting things and provide a little bit more of a perspective about the mythology in the case, and done an adequate job for episode 13 here?
I definitely think we did. We definitely pretty much killed the George Bush myth. The LBJ one's a little more tougher, just because of all of the crap surrounding it and the amount of people that are, propagating the theory, and, all of the supposed motives that Lyndon Johnson could have had, to have Kennedy killed or be complicit in a plot. But I think with all the allegations being made out there, that, we pretty much gave a good illustration of how ridiculous most of them are, even on the surface, and that's not including if you want to go digging just a little further to try and disprove some of the claims of these people. So, yeah, I think we did a hell of a job.
There you go. Steve, do you think I realize you're outnumbered as far as guys who think that Oswald is not the singular answer here, but was it fair? Was it reasonable? Did we handle this, in your estimation, well? I mean, you got to put aside your own participation, but I mean, as far as everything else you heard, seemed like we're handling this logically, reasonably, sensibly?
Yeah, I think so, Chuck, and that those are valid points you guys made, all of you guys, and and that's what I dwell on. Is it logical? Is it can you verify and everything like that? And I think you guys are doing a great job there. It's good service, keep it up. It's 13 now. Maybe what is it going to be? 55 later, probably. And I just want to give a little shout out to old Carmine about another myth that he busted. The tall gentleman there walking in downtown Dallas with a rifle. That's a little story that maybe not a people are aware of, but anyway, a lot of people put credence on or try to put it Jerry Hemming in that deal, but as strange as it may sound, but Carmine and I were covering on parallel planes there.
Yeah, I still remember that. You were the only other person I've talked to before I presented Hill that knew about him.
Yeah, we were on parallel planes and working it, and lo and behold, I don't know how it came about, but anyway. But what was the clincher that Carmine did was he actually produced a picture of the gentleman. His name was John Henry Hill. This guy was like 6'6", I believe, 6'7".
280.
Yeah, I mean,
he's a monster.
Yeah, he had just purchased a rifle at Cole's over there, and it was a sporting goods place over there in Elm Street. and walking down when this person identified it and wrote it up in an FBI report, but an affidavit. But anyway, Carmine got the picture of this guy, and the clincher was blonde hair, and that pretty much cinched it up. But anyway, that's my shout out to Merrill Carmine.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. Hey, I know I'm sure you would have got. I still remember that. That was
I was looking in Wichita Falls, and you were looking in Dallas, and where was it, Sunset High School or whatever?
Yeah.
I can't remember. Yeah. I was over in Wichita Falls, and you were in Sunset.
See,
well done.
And credit to both of you, because this guy was just a name I vaguely recall running across at some point, and would have never bothered to really start to dig into this like Carmine did, or like you did, to even track down, listen, at least we can put a rifle in somebody's hands in the area, in some way. It's a lot clearer than a lot of these other assertions that other people make, where it's just like, listen, I got this list of names. We heard the teams. I don't want to revisit it, Rob. I'm not going to do it. But the names that Rob read off, I mean, mind-blowing. Can you put a witness on it? Can you put a photograph on it? Can you verify? Well, we can verify that most of those people weren't there, but can we verify that any of them were there? No, this guy you can at least put in the area with a rifle. Which
for me was the first.
Yeah.
Out of most of these stories, you never actually have the people give you a piece of evidence that shows you they had a rifle in their hands and they were nearby.
Right, which is interesting, for more than one reason. Because even, again, though Steve believes, the official story effectively, you got to say that this guy is interesting, and why wasn't he examined a little more closely if there wasn't sort of already a conclusion in hand? You got to at least say that objectively, Steve, right?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of circumstance around Mr. Hill. He's since passed on, but that raised your eyebrows, right, Carmen?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And one of the things I think that most is, like I said, to me the reason why he stood out was because normally these stories fall apart, and his kept going, and then it just ended. So there is definitely that interesting factor about him, and Rob brought this up on a show that I did with him, where chances are he's not our guy. Like everybody else, he's going to fall to the wayside, and he didn't do anything. But that's what I was talking about, proving every element. We proved every element of the crime up until those last moments with Hill, and similar with Oswald and a lot of other suspects. If you can't put it in their hands, in the area they're supposed to be in, at the time they're supposed to be at, with motive, means, and opportunity, you got more to prove. So that's really,
and it rules out the accusation of
that no other people could be there.
Yeah, Jerry Hemming was there with rifle in hand, walking through the streets of Dallas because he fit the description.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps to put that to bed a lot too, because I got something else up my sleeve for the next Miss show.
Nice.
Well, that's good, because I'm planning on following this one up a lot sooner than we did this time and last, because there's a whole lot more areas to cover, and certainly want to thank each of these gentlemen for being on with me tonight. And it is amazing when we actually come together and try to put together something which is logical, sensible, and is literally backed by some evidence. At the very least, I mean. Look, I'm not saying that Hill is the guy either. I certainly don't believe that, because that has not been proven, from A to Z as far as I'm concerned. And it's not even like there's a couple of missing pieces. The story just sort of stops. I find it more fascinating that it was not followed up on a bit more. I think it should have been, if you consider that a conclusion should not have been in hand. If you're objectively looking at anything, you got to say to yourself, okay, so who do I have with, some element here which I can attach to the narrative? The motive, means, and opportunity is a great template. There's a reason why they use it in a court of law. Guess what? You could kind of ascribe a motive here, which is memorialized. You can ascribe means, Okay, now the problem is opportunity. We have proximity, which is not opportunity, but it is a step. And it seems to me like I would have followed up on this a bit more if I were an investigator objectively looking at it. So to me, I see it as a failure of an investigation, but, not the key failure, but yet one of those leads that could have been followed up on. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think that the most important, for me personally, I think there's, various interesting things about Hill, but the most important thing about Hill is it shows there can be other people armed near Dealey Plaza at the time, and no one knows.
Well, that's the other interesting thing, is unless we adequately examine all of the evidence, we can't make these wild statements like there is no way that this or that happened. You can't even come close to making certain definitive statements. And people have tried to do this, where it's like, well, we can't find this person anywhere else, so they had to be in Dealey Plaza. You're going in the wrong direction. You're walking backwards, my friend. Simply because you can't put them somewhere else doesn't put them in Dealey Plaza. You know what I'm saying? You gotta take these things step by step, which is something that apparently both you and Steve did regarding this character. And again, it was one of those things that I got to learn alongside of you guys, and I'm very, very grateful for that, because the more we learn about this, the more we can eliminate a lot of the excess to the information that is legitimate, and I'll just call it the excess at this point, because what does your body do with excessive nutrients? Anyway, here we go. That's where it goes. It goes into the file, if you will, and I think we did a fair job of Myths 13. Once again, the Lone Gunman podcast is Rob Clark's thing. Steve Rowe, you can find him out there on social media and stuff. Don't know if he's going to take on a lot of friends, because I don't think he wants to put up with a lot of nonsense. So, if you're coming with nonsense to Steve, don't look for him. But if you aren't, if you're actually out there willing to participate in an honest exploration of some very fine information, Steve is a guy that you can have a reasonable conversation with, regardless of the fact that you may disagree with his conclusions, because Steve would be more than happy to see legitimate information come to light regarding this case, and I'm sure he agrees with all of us here that a solid conclusion all the way around would suit everybody a lot better than wild speculation and fairy tales being manufactured by those that either seek attention, finance, or whatever it might be. Right, Steve?
Right. And anybody, next time you guys want to get in a General Walker, we can. So.
Oh, and you know what? A General Walker show would be very cool, and I know you'd be one of the guys I would have to bring in on it. Carmine, of course, Two Princes and a King, TPAAK.com. Obviously, my continued shotgun rider here, co-host on Thursdays, Thursday, if you will. Do appreciate you for joining me as well and helping to bring all this together. There will be a list of references along with this podcast, and I don't know, maybe I'll come up with a couple other nuggets to add to it. But usually that stuff, for the most part, is Carmine's work. But anyway, all these gentlemen, I appreciate their time, and I appreciate you, the listener, for tuning in and paying attention to some information. You might not be the largest audience in the world, but if you're actually taking the information in that we're giving you, you might be some of the smartest audience in the world. Anyways, do appreciate you guys, no matter who you are, where you are. I hope you're doing well. The Ochelli Effect is done. Remember, I am merely Ochelli. All of you and all the people on this call and the people that participate in this show are the Effect. Have a good night.